Hello and welcome to the Seatton Education podcast, where we delve into all things home education with expert guests from around the world. I'm Victoria. Today I'm speaking to Beverly Huebner, a Canadian mother who homeschooled her children. She's kindly agreed to share with us her reflections and key takeouts from the years spent educating her family. Bev, thanks so much for joining me. Could you start by telling me a bit about where you live, how many children you have, and how long you've been home educating?
Okay, we have two children. They're both adults. Our daughter married the homeschool boy down the road, and they have four children, and the oldest just graduated from homeschooling this year. We also have a son who is single and is working in the city about an hour away from us. We are in Manitoba, Canada.
Are your children now, how old are they?
They're in their 40s. We have been out of homeschooling longer than we homeschooled. So we homeschooled our children from kindergarten to grade 12, both of them, and they now are productive adults in their own way, and both very successful.
And so what was the atmosphere at the time when you started home educating?
When we started home educating, we actually only knew one other family considering it, and we didn't even know what it was. And so we had sent our daughter to kindergarten because that's what you do when your child turns 5, you send them to kindergarten. And the reason we started homeschooling and were interested in it is because our son showed developmental delays right from birth. He was like a year and a half before he walked. He was 3.5 before he talked. He just was delayed in a lot of fine motor skills, gross motor skills. And we knew that he wouldn't do well if we sent him off to school because he would be delayed and then probably bullied. And so we looked into home education because we felt that once we looked into it, we felt that maybe if we delayed his education and let him grow up a little bit, he would eventually catch up with his peers. So we chose to home educate both our children because we said if it was a good education for our son, it would even be better for our daughter who has no learning disabilities. So we home educated them, started off 1 year at a time, just like a lot of other people, because we had no idea what we were doing. And we absolutely loved, or I should say I loved it. My husband was very supportive, loved spending time with my children one-on-one, and the accomplishment of teaching them how to read. That you think that it has to be an educator, but it doesn't. Teaching your child how to read is just the next step after teaching them how to walk and how to talk and how to potty train and how to draw and color and know their letters. It's a progression. And I looking back, I say, there's no way when I started, I would think that I could teach algebra and chemistry and all the higher education subjects. But what I found is that I relearned or learned more home educating than I ever did in school, because whatever you're teaching your children, you have to learn. We started, like I said, 1 year at a time, and it was going so well. We loved the dynamics in the family. My husband was very supportive, and he also got involved in leadership in the province very early while we were homeschooling. It was a lifestyle. We didn't have a lot of choices of curriculum. We didn't have a lot of people that we knew. My support group met once a month because we all lived about 50 miles apart. There weren't very many homeschoolers around. But the family that started homeschooling at the same time as us, they attended the same church and lived in the same area. They homeschooled their four children, and our daughter married their son. So he changed from a friend of the family to a husband for her. So that worked out really well because they had no question that when they got married, they would home educate their children. So we now have seen them working on this next generation. Like I said, our granddaughter just graduated high school, and the next one is 16, and the next one is 12, and then she has an 8-year-old as well.
And do you see any differences between the things that you were doing in your homeschool and how your daughter and son-in-law are doing it? What have they changed and what are they doing the same?
So when we started, we didn't know anything. And so we started by doing school at home. So we would have the little desk and had her subjects in her little workbooks that she had to fill out. And that's what we did for the first couple of years. And slowly we relaxed a little bit. One of the things I found really worked well for our family is to do the math and language at their grade level and then everything else at the older one's grade level. We didn't do paperwork for science and social studies and history. We did those together out loud, and any testing was done orally with Q&A and projects and write-ups. We learned together as a family. I wasn't trying to teach two different subjects, two different children, 5 different subjects every day. So it worked out really well for us. And we have friends that have more children, and they did the same thing. If they were studying Canadian history this year, everybody in the family studied Canadian history that year and taught it at the higher level, because the younger ones can understand a whole lot more than they can understand from reading with their reading levels. But we struggled. Am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? So when our daughter was finishing grade 5, we had her tested, because in our province, you don't need to do testing as part of your home education. But we did the Canadian Basic Skills Test, and she tested at or above her grade level in all subjects, and way off the charts for reading and vocabulary and comprehension, because we didn't dumb anything down. We didn't work to the lowest common denominator in a classroom. We taught our children with a large vocabulary using really good books. I read aloud to my children right through to grade 12. Every afternoon, we would pull out a book, and I would read several chapters from the book, and we would talk about them together. I grew with my knowledge of vocabulary and content, and they grew way beyond their grade level.
I'm so pleased you mentioned that, because you've picked up on some points that I think people worry about. They worry a lot about, people who've spoken to us, how can it possibly be rigorous enough education? Won't my children fall behind? You've answered that question beautifully with when you had your daughter externally tested. And also, I think that other point is, which people often overlook, even if you have a large family, the ratio of adults to children is so much, it's so different from what you get in even really good small schools. So they're around adults a lot more than being around children.
Our daughter is an October baby, and so she was only 4 when she started kindergarten, and we felt that when grade 1 came around, she was still very young. And I didn't want to be apart from her for a whole day every day for the next year. So we chose to keep her home because of that, partly because I just didn't want to send her off to school yet. So we started with the home education, and we really enjoyed it, and so we continued. One of the things you asked was, do I teach different than my daughter? And I have to say definitely yes. Because I was home educated in a public school, I tried to teach the way I was taught. But by the time I finished homeschooling with her, I had relaxed it to the point where she was basically self-educating, mainly on the couch, no desks anymore. And I would give her assignments, and then she would do the reading and the reports and follow up by herself. Mathematics, my husband would come home and go over her lessons with her, because once we hit calculus, I was lost. But she, on the other hand, is extremely relaxed. She spends more time with the group, because you've got an age gap between 18 to 8, so a 10-year age gap, and yet they still did all their history and science as a family. So they would do all their work together as a family, and then once that was finished, she would work individually with the younger 2, while the older 2 did their own assignments. And so it worked really well in their family as well.
How did your friends and relatives react when you made this bold lifestyle decision in the 80s?
Well, in the 80s, it was a very unknown thing. So it was difficult. I'd say my father would not have liked this. He died shortly before we started. He died young, and he was all for education. Education was the most important thing, and he would not have understood this. My mom just went along with it, didn't really have an opinion. Gerald's parents were very supportive. They thought it was a kind of cool thing. We didn't get a lot of support from our friends around us. Our pastor in our church thought that we were not doing the right thing. And when we started, there was only one other family in our community that homeschooled, and that was our neighbor. And it was difficult. You didn't go to the grocery store during the day with your school-age children. It was too many questions. I would, like when they were younger, it was okay. Like when they were still only 5 and 6, it was, nobody questioned it. But It was difficult at first. It became more mainstream as we got along, moved along, and it's been more so now. And now, since COVID, everybody in the world knows what home education is about, and I appreciate that.
Mm.
We really enjoyed the flexibility that happens with home education. My husband is in agriculture, so he works all summer long. His long hours are in spring, summer, and fall. So we actually took our vacations in late fall. We would go travel. We love to camp. We love to travel. And we would connect it with some kind of meeting or something that we could connect it with. And we would travel in the fall. And our children would not do any schoolwork during that time. But because it's so educational to travel, you go to museums, you go to parks, you see different nature and places. We tried to gear our learning around what we were seeing and doing. And that, we have to do reports to the local government office. And when I listed all the different things we did in that 3-week period, he sent me a note back saying, I'd like to be in your school. So that was the government official that was overseeing our homeschooling.
That's a pretty resounding success.
Oh, yes, definitely.
I think as well, I've found, and I don't know if you agree with this, that it's like a toggle in your brain, that once it's on, these learning opportunities are everywhere. And I think if you're already in the habit of asking your children questions all the time, saying, what do you think about this? What's this? What did you take out from this? It doesn't, maybe to our children's annoyance, it doesn't really switch off. It's always on. Anything is an opportunity. So when you go to a museum, I feel when we're with non-home educating families, they say, oh, wow, actually, you're asking the kids these questions all the time. But as you say, it's this toggle once it's on, just to be constantly using it as a prompt to learn. The goal would be that it's switched on in your children's brains forever, and they're always looking for these opportunities, and this curious way of thinking is it's been lit as a fire.
When my children were young, we didn't have access to the internet, so we used the library a lot. And I would go to the library and I would pick a topic, say sea creatures in the ocean. And I would pick up every single children's book I could find on that subject. And then I would pile them up on the coffee table in the living room and ignore them. And usually after they had done their regular schoolwork, they were into those books and they were learning. Mm. And then when they were younger, they would bring them to me and I would read them to them. And then as they got older, they read them to themselves. I just feel that you can stimulate an interest. You don't have to wait for them to show an interest in a subject, but you can stimulate interest. So every 6 weeks, we would take those books back and get another topic. And I would clean out the shelf on that topic in the children's section. I could take up to 50 books out at a time. And so I would take 50 books out, and every 6 weeks, we'd take them back and go get another 50 books. And it really stimulated a lot of interesting conversations around the table at supper time.
Yes, yeah, I can imagine. And there's just been a report published this week in the UK by the National Literacy Trust that less than 50% of British children now say that they enjoy reading for pleasure. And I feel a little bit shivery even just saying it, because I think that's such a tragedy. And I think it's interesting it was published by a literacy trust, but actually the ramifications of that are huge, because you learn so much, not just educationally, but socially, psychologically. There's so much you can develop through reading both fiction and non-fiction. And I think we're doing our children a disservice if we don't provide those feasts of options for them to dive into. I think it's great for kids to pursue interests, but often we don't know what we don't know. And so to be able to delve into things and find out what you're interested in is such a gift, I think. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I've been a voracious reader since I was in elementary school. And I've always got at least 2 or 3 books on the go. And my daughter picked it up from me. My son struggled a little bit, but he liked to read. So I'm very thankful that I was able to pass that on to my children. We did a lot of audio listening while we were traveling. Like I said, we took these 2-3 week trips in the fall, and they were short stories we did long ones as well. I read books to the kids while we traveled as well. We did a lot of audio stuff because we didn't have electronics. How do you entertain an 8-10-year-old without electronics in your car when you drive 8 hours a day? You have to plan. And so we did a lot of audiobooks, a lot of talking about where we were going. And they got to make scrapbooks of their trip. so that they had to work on them in between locations so they didn't forget. There's a lot of learning happening all day long, every day. It's not a 5-hour period from morning till mid-afternoon. It's all day and every day when you're home educating. And also, I am so glad that I did not have to deal with the internet when my children were young. We got our first DOS computer when they were like middle school. And by the time you logged in and got it into the game or whatever, it was already a half an hour.
Like you, I went to conventional school, and I think, therefore, we get a lot of people of our age saying to us, why home education? Where on earth did this crazy idea come from? And one of the things I do say to people is, none of us above the age of 30 can really imagine what school is like with the advent of social media and internet everywhere. It's changed the environment so much. And of course, there are fantastic things to it. I've worked inside schools here in the UK, and I don't know if a lot of parents realize what excessive social media use looks like on the ground in classrooms. It really shocked me. And for us, that was a big factor when we were making our decision.
Yeah. And my daughter would agree with you. Even though she grew up home educating, she still has to deal with that electronics in the household and limits, and teaching her children limits. And she has teenage girls now and teaching them limits. She still has full access to their phones, and they only have 1 hour of access to outside on their apps or anything internet a day.
And what did you do about exams? I think people sometimes worry, that's well and good, but what about getting into university? What about getting a job?
Okay, that's very subjective to where you live. In the United States, they fought very hard to get their kids into universities and colleges. And it's to the point now where some colleges will give you a scholarship for every year you were homeschooled. They'll give you $1,000 per year for homeschooling. If you did 12 years, they'd get $12,000 towards your college, because they found that home educated children are self-learners. They are responsible. They are on top of their assignments. They test well because they internalize the knowledge so well. My daughter went to college. The first semester, she at the end of the semester, she took the exams and she did well. She hadn't been tested at all. Other than that grade 5 one-time testing, we had never really tested her. We had done a lot of mastery learning where you don't move on until you know what you're doing. And our province didn't require testing. But the college that we sent her to, basically the kids sink or swim based on their skills. So at the end of the first semester, she got a good grade point average. And all the friends she had been hanging out and going out for coffee in the evenings and visiting with had to do remedial classes because they didn't get a very good high GPA. Whereas she had been handing her assignments in 2 weeks early because, it was done, I might as well hand it in. She figured out what the professor wanted by visiting him and talking to him. She figured out what he would put on the test just based on his talk. And so she would study the things that he had talked about. Because you're home educated, you're not stuck in your peer group. You interact with adults, you interact with children, you interact with teens, you interact with all different age groups. And so you aren't intimidated by going and talking one-on-one with a professor. Interaction with adults is not a difficult thing to do when you're not uncomfortable doing it, when you're not feeling intimidated by professors. They're just people just like you and me.
I think that's a really good point to make. I'm going to ask you this next question because we all get asked it, but I think it's interesting in response to what you've just said, the what about socialization question. I'm not exactly sure what people mean when they ask that, but I think what they mean is either what about social skills or maybe what about having friends. So maybe you could address those 2 points.
We live 5 miles from the town where the school is, and our children couldn't play with friends in the neighborhood because there were none. So I would have to arrange play dates for them when they were younger. Once they got a little older, we put them into, our daughter did figure skating, and they both attended a kids club at church. So those were their social interactions. But as far as spending every day, 5 days a week with the same friends, there's a proverb in the Bible that says, a companion of fools is a fool. When you'd get a bunch of 12-year-old boys together, they have more foolishness than we want to know about. So what we wanted is we wanted our children to be influenced by people with strong character. And you don't find that in the general pool. You have to go outside that because you have to go with older and more mature people in order to get good character. Because when you're 12, you haven't developed a lot of character yet. You're just in the process. So your examples have to be people that have good character. So they spent a lot of time with us. So they reflect us a lot in their worldview and in their character. But they also attended church activities, kids club, youth group, and those are kids that were raised in homes that are similar to ours with the similar values and morals. And so we were fortunate that they grasped those morals and values as well.
I suppose people might then say, oh, aren't they sheltered? What would be your response to that? Are home educated children sheltered?
I hope so. Do you really want to expose them to all that garbage that's out in this world now? You monitor your children based on their maturity. And so we did not want our children exposed to a lot of things before they were mature enough to understand it and to make wise choices. And so we were careful with who they spent time with because we wanted to make sure that they knew themselves before they had to make decisions that were beyond them. We don't see any issues with our children. Our children have a strong worldview and they're quite comfortable with anybody. But if there are negative things, it doesn't affect them in the same way because they know inside who they are and what they believe.
And I think that is actually very difficult. That's something that is very difficult for young people to get when they're at school, or just that's hard for teenagers to find that internal compass, and their internal identity is very difficult to find when you're in a sea of 29 other 16-year-old voices in a classroom. So I think that makes sense. And I think that would make sense to a lot of parents who even don't know about home education. And I just wondered lastly if you could reflect on, if you had one key reflection on your time home educating, what was the best thing about your decision to do it?
I loved it. I loved the projects. I'm a very hands-on type of person. I love the making and the doing and the reenacting. And it's funny because, like I said, I love the hands-on. My son loved to hear it. And my daughter, she could just read it and know it. She didn't need to do all the extra stuff. But she says she loved it because I was so excited about subjects. She got excited about them. It's a sense of accomplishment, too, just for me. I feel like I did not work in the workforce because I was home with my children. And so some people would look down on that and say, you're just a housewife. But I felt that I had worth because I was raising my children and caring for them and educating them and getting them ready to be productive members of society. And that was my job. And my husband was willing to live on one income with us in order for us to do that. And that's a big thing, is to have the support of your husband. I don't know if I could have done this without his support. He's been my rock. Anytime there was like problems or I was struggling with anything, I could take it to him and he would listen. I don't know if I really wanted him to answer the question, more just listen and let me process the information verbally. That's my way of working through things. And I just love the way our family was together so much, and that my children have a relationship with each other because they grew up together, and the relationship with the family down the road who she married into. Yeah, it's been a good experience for us. And watching my daughter do it, I'm seeing this even more benefits because she has 4 children. There's a little bit different dynamic, and it's still seeing their family do things together and love to do things together. Just being like the 18-year-old, she's not quite 18, 17-year-old, spending time with her 8-year-old brother and doing things with him. So it's fun to see them interacting. And we don't see a lot of squabbles in homeschool kids because they're with each other so much. They have to be each other's best friend. And so they are. And they have to learn how to work through difficulties because they're with each other all the time. There isn't the option to change friends and go with a different group of friends. You have to stick with your family. And it's so neat to see them work through those problems and then become best friends. Like the 8-year-old and 12-year-old play together all the time. Even they're fortunate. They have homeschooled people that live next door and behind them. So there's a whole slew of kids that are out there every day at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And they all play together really well. And when they get tired of each other, they go home.
Bev, thank you so much. It's been such a great and rich insight for me, and I'm sure for our audience too. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for joining the Seatton Education podcast. Whether you watched us on YouTube or you listened as a podcast, please comment and follow as we discuss how home education can be an achievable alternative to conventional schooling. See you next time.